Hello and welcome to the Paddock Pass podcast presented by Renthal Street Components. With over 800 street fitments for handlebars, bar mounts, clip-ons, brake pads, chains and sprockets, check out renthal.com. As ever, we have a full cast of podcasters on today's review show from the Indonesian Grand Prix. Myself, Steve English, David Emmett, Adam Wheeler, and most importantly, we've got Neil Morrison dialing in on Zoom from Jakarta Airport. So we're going to give a little bit of an apology in advance for Neil's audio quality, but time is of the essence to get Neil on the pod. So we've been able to draft him in from the airport. This is going to be the 268th episode of the Paddock Pass podcast. And while that sounds like a big number, tell you what, we've never had a show where we're going to talk about some of the things we're going to talk about on today's show. We had basically local witches trying to ward off evil spirits such as the rain. We had everything from new tires from Michelin to some exciting racing, and really, Neil, other than probably the biggest crash that any of us have ever seen in the four-stroke era of MotoGP, there was loads to talk about over the course of the Indonesian Grand Prix. But I'm most interested to know how you fared on the ground.
Not too bad, Steve. Yeah, pretty good. It was a bit of a chaotic weekend in some respects. I mean, we had so much going on. We had kind of the weather. We had iffy track surface that was breaking apart. Moto2 race on Sunday, threatening maybe how the MotoGP race was going to pan out. We had shortened races. It was, it all kind of came, we had a kind of a harder Michelin tire, which threw everyone off. So all these things combined together made it just have that kind of slightly chaotic feel. But the experience in Indonesia itself was really cool, I must say. First time I'd ever been on the island of Lombok, and that was great. It's a pretty unique setting for a MotoGP race. As you know, Steve, you were there last year for Superbikes, and I have to say it was, even though maybe the crowds weren't there in the numbers that we were anticipating or expecting, it was still cool to see the reaction of the Indonesian fans. And it's not always the case that you hear massive screams and roars from the grandstands opposite the media centre and opposite the pit building, but that was certainly the case yesterday. You got a real impression of atmosphere and excitement, so that was cool.
There were lots of photos of crowds actually sort of standing on the hillside and all the rest of it. Were there more people outside the track than inside the track?
I mean, that's tough to say. As you know, Dave, I'm a pretty sensitive-skinned chap, and I can't really be striding around the track in the middle of the afternoon heat, not least in a place which is just below the equator. So I was out and about on Thursday, but just looking at photographs taken by our colleagues, there were a fair amount of people outside, yeah. It was very strange, like very quiet on Friday and Saturday. I thought it was going to be like completely empty, but there were actually decent crowds yesterday. I went out and spoke to a few people outside the track on just before the Moto3 race started, and there were lots of people coming in. Parking and transport into the circuit was a total disaster, but having anyone that's been in Jakarta before will know that maybe that is sort of something that you associate with Indonesia, the traffic jams and things like that. So yeah, I'm not sure the ratio of people outside to inside, but I think around, they said 60,000 showed up on Sunday. I think considering the enthusiasm for MotoGP in this country, we were expecting a bit more.
Yeah, obviously we get a lot of listeners from Indonesia on the podcast as well, so I'm sure it was pretty special for any of them that were in attendance over the weekend. David, obviously during the course of the qualifying session, we saw again a lot of talk, especially even in Q1, about whether or not guys would go with a two-stop strategy or whether they try and make do and try and save a soft tire. I have to ask you, what was your coffee strategy during the course of this weekend? Was it 2 cups, 3 cups, or was it just shovel in as much as you possibly could?
Yeah, it was very much a quantity over quality strategy. It was, as you know, I am not a morning person. I think there are
You're barely an afternoon person, Dave.
No, I can, I can sort of cope with the, it's a nice time to get, sort of noon, 1 p.m. is a really good time to get your day started. Mornings. The worst thing about these races, unless you actually go to them, is the mornings. And if you do actually go to them, then you're stuck with jet lag.
And Adam, obviously it was a very full weekend for you. You had get up nice and early, watch the races. Then you have to jump on Zoom calls. Then you have to write some stuff. You also had to be a dad. You had to go to Geordie's football matches yesterday. So I'd say Sunday evening rolled around and you were ready for bed.
It was a busy weekend, Steve. I was playing myself. We won 5-1 on Father's Day. And then, of course, on Sunday, it was a 4:30 start for me in the morning. So I was thinking of Dave. I was tempted to ring him up, but I thought it'd be particularly cruel. But being 4:30, it meant he probably only went to bed about an hour beforehand after doing his write-up, his analysis. And then, of course, the MXGP was in Argentina. So I started the day in the dark, working in front of the computer, and I finished it in the dark. That was obviously I think 3 or 4 hours behind. So busy one. But I'm flying to Seattle in a couple of days for the latest round of Supercross. So that'll be a good time to get some content, and then not straight, but then Austin next. So
I'm not jealous of you at all going to Seattle, lad.
Yeah, well, I mean, traditionally it rains, so it's not. I'm going to be going there and enjoying any Californian sunshine, that's for sure. As is normally the case, visiting Supercross. But Austin, it sounds like there's quite a few plans to do some legacy stuff. So it should be quite interesting, what we're going to see there. So it'll be a good first MotoGP for me after my Qatar frustration.
Yeah, we're going to try and organise a couple of things over the Austin weekend as well. Because obviously Adam, David and Neil are all going to be on site. So we're going to try and organise a few things for our patrons from the US and maybe a meetup as well. So keep an eye on all of our social channels for that, and we'll keep you posted on it. Obviously enough, guys, there's an awful lot to talk about. So we're going to jump straight into it with our moments of the weekend. So Adam, this is in alphabetical order today. Adam, what was your moment of the weekend?
Are we starting on the fantasy league yet or not? Oh, okay, right.
We're ignoring that for as long as possible. Hoops GP.
Right. Sorry, I thought we were going straight into it. My moment of the weekend was Marc's crash in warm up. I'm sure we're going to talk about Marc, in more depth on the podcast. But to see I think the sheer violence of that crash was shocking for a lot of people, and it's something I know. Dave, you posted on Twitter that you went into the accident almost frame by frame because the genesis of it. I mean, it's basically a high side, but we said on the Paddock podcast note show on Sunday, I don't think we've seen anything quite as big or as scary as that since maybe Jorge Lorenzo in China, in his first season in MotoGP. But I contacted Alpine Stars for some data on the crash, and I think they might put out some sort of press release later this week, but they believe it was well over 25 G when he was flicked off the bike. He was airborne for over a second. And of course, they're quite pumped with the way that their tech air system managed to, help Marc avoid the brunt of the crash or many more injuries apart from a knock to the head. In particular, the super tech boots that Alpine Stars have. Boots, I guess people are quite dismissive of them. They usually help riders in terms of abrasion and wear when they crash, but it seems the impact protection that Marquez had there did a good job in stopping him breaking more bones. But yeah, just the shock of that, Steve, the fact that he was missing in the Grand Prix, that was my moment.
Yeah, I have to say, because obviously you guys are usually in the media center for pretty much all sessions. I managed to get out quite a bit to take some photos, especially if I go to a GP or a test or anything like that. And I've had it a few times where there's been a crash in front of me. And a big high side is it's so violent. We're used to seeing it on TV, but when you see a trackside, it's absolutely nothing like what we see on TV. It really does look like the world's going to end for that rider. And this crash was a proper old school 500 two-stroke kind of crash. It was massive. So I can only imagine what it was like for anyone that was trackside for something like that. Absolutely huge crash. But David, what about you? What was your moment of the weekend?
Well, my moment of the weekend is the person who saved the whole weekend, which is the rain shaman, the Pawang Hujan, the Indonesian woman who came out in the middle of the deluge and performed a ceremony to control the clouds and chase them away, and successfully. Naturally, performing rain ceremonies in climates where it's only ever going to rain for an hour is always going to be successful. So that was good. It felt really interesting to actually see some real local culture instead of sort of the very staged stuff you always get to see at events. This felt much more fun. And as far as I can tell, I was looking up some of the, or I was sort of Googling some stuff, and she's turned into with this massive viral TV hit in Indonesia. She was on lots of the TV channels. So that was great. I just enjoyed it. Also, it just felt like you were doing something. Do you know what I mean? Like, we're trying our best instead of standing outside looking up into the sky and thinking, "Oh well, I hope it stops." It at least someone was actually doing something.
So from everything that happened in the Grand Prix day, you picked a lady banging a coconut on the grid.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was actually a kind of a gong, and they make a very nice sound. You know, it's the old Indonesian gamelan thing, which is very, very, very restful and peaceful. So, and at that time in the morning, something restful and peaceful is very much what I'm about.
Well, Neil, I imagine
Dave was obviously sat there taking notes, ready to perform the ceremony for when we go to Aston later in the year.
I was just going to say, Neil, it must have actually reminded you of being in Catalonia, just with someone going around banging pots and pans in protest.
Yes, that is a good point, Steve, although that hasn't happened in Catalonia recently. But yeah, at one point it was like, are we really watching this? But I think they managed to do a relatively good job of maintaining everyone's concentration and interest, because I think they had a brass band. They had the president of Indonesia show up in front of the grandstand to wave. They had the shaman, obviously. So, yeah, I think compared to some long rain delays that we've had, this one was actually fairly entertaining.
Yeah, and obviously, Neil, you've had your fair share of walking around shame on a Sunday, but what was your moment of the weekend?
My moment of the weekend, Steve, was in the MotoGP race. It was when two brothers came together on track, and the less experienced one, and the one that has been derided for some of his antics in the past, and the fact that he managed to land a MotoGP ride for this year, put a move on the older, more experienced one, who was on the podium in the previous MotoGP race. Darren Binder, his sensational ride through the field, I think he was 22nd after the first lap. First race, first experience in full wet conditions on a MotoGP machine, with Michelin's rain tyres, which are vastly different to what he was using from Dunlop in the Moto3 class in previous years. And it took him a few laps to get up to speed, but he just grew in confidence, fought his way through, and at one point was sitting in 8th, which was a pretty tremendous flight back, considering I think just one rider crashed in front of him, who was Jorge Martin. So it was quite interesting to see a lot of the very vocal critics of Darren Binder that were very vocal at the end of last year. So I really enjoyed that.
And he's leading the Rookie of the Year Championship at the moment as well. So, well outclassing Raul Fernandez, Remy Gardner, who were first and second in the Moto2 Championship, and ahead of Fabio Di Gianantonio. Yeah,
the Binder battle was definitely something that was really interesting during the course of that race. And like you said, Neil, it's nice for Darren to be able to sign on some of those critics. You know, we've talked about it quite a bit in the pod in the pre-season build-up about how a lot of the issues that Binder had in Moto3 with that riding style likely weren't going to be an issue in MotoGP, because you can't ride a bike like that in GP. And it was good to see Binder able to show something here so early in the season as well. I think for me, my moment of the weekend was Jake Dixon getting his pole position in Moto2, just because it's, again, a pit like Binder, it shows that big step forward that can be made once you're on the right package for you as well. Dixon, obviously, we've seen a few flashes from him over the last few years. I think back to Le Mans in 2020 and a couple of other races where he's really been able to show something. It was good to be able to see him get that pole position, and just a shame he crashed out in the early stages of the race, but at least it gives him something really big to build on.
Always a highlight of Steve English this weekend when he sees a Union Jack displayed all around the TV cameras.
Yeah, Paddy's Day, it isn't the same unless there's Union Jacks everywhere.
Dave, is that really your, I mean, sorry, I don't want to be, doubting moments of the weekend after calling out Dave's fondness for the rain lady, but, shouldn't Jake Dixon be shouldn't he be making pole position more regularly? I mean, and also, wasn't it kind of fairly typical of the way things have gone so far that he does so well on the Saturday, but then fails to deliver on the Sunday? Again, I don't want to sort of, be overly negative to the guy, but, I think that's the performance level he should be setting, shouldn't it?
I don't really think so, to be honest, because I don't think Dixon's that guy that week in, week out is going to be able to get himself to the front. I think it's one of those ones where he needs his good weekends to have a chance like this. Indonesia is obviously a bit of a unique set of circumstances given the conditions we had over the weekend. He started the season well in Qatar with some good pace. This is where he hopefully makes a step forward and he's able to do this a bit more consistently. But it's a bit like anything else. Whenever you're looking at the Moto2 class, like when you look at that class, when you look at the entry list, when you look at session by session, I think if Dixon's up there inside the top 6 each week, I think he's doing really well. I don't expect him to be a pole hound. I don't expect him to be podiums every week. I was surprised whenever I was, reading about the build up to the race and people were talking about him as, your can't miss favourite to win the race, because I didn't expect him to go out and win the race. If he gets a podium, I think he's done a really good job. But Neil, obviously you're much better placed to be able to talk a little Moto2. But what about you? What was your thoughts on Dixon's weekend?
Thought it was impressive. Obviously, very unfortunate that he crashed out. I spoke to his team boss, Gino Borsoy, after the race, and Gino backed up Jake's claim that he hadn't really done anything differently than the previous lap. They had checked his data and they'd seen no difference in where he braked and his lean angle. Rain had started falling very, not gently, but there were definitely spits of rain just prior to him crashing. So it looks as though that might have caught him out. But yeah, really unfortunate. I think to answer your question, okay, you could say Jake should be doing this in his fourth year, but just when you look at last year, last year was such a tough year for him. I think he really has made a significant step forward to go from a guy that was occasionally getting top tens to a guy that's now top in sessions and fighting for the front row, race contender. I think that's a pretty notable step forward for him. So you have to feel that the result is coming.
Yeah, I think for me, whenever I look at that class, I do see Dixon as being, over the course of a season, let's say we got 21 races. If he can have 6 or 7 weekends like he had in Indonesia, and then on his other weekends to be able to grind out good results, I think that'd be really impressive from him. I thought one of the most interesting things for me in Moto2 this weekend, even just looking at the British riders from that perspective, Dixon had his crash because he's not that used to being at the front of the field. I thought it was interesting that for a second race in a row, we saw Sam Lowes take a step back. The conditions were tricky and he looked at it for the long game. And I think that's one of those things that Dixon's out there trying to prove himself, just like we saw Lowes do for so many years, really out living for that moment, living for that race, whereas you need to look at it from a much longer perspective as well. And I think that's where these early rounds, David, you tweet about it a lot. It's your bad days that lose you a championship. And these early rounds, you need to make sure you're able to keep yourself in the hunt. Obviously enough, we're going to move on from moments of the weekend to our big talking points. So Adam, we'll start off with you for this. What was your big talking point from the weekend?
I'd like to know your opinion, guys, because I kind of believe that the rain saved this Grand Prix. There was a moment where it seemed to be dropping into an element of farce. You cannot, or anybody, I don't think, can doubt the ambition behind Mandalika and the work they've done on Lombok. Indonesia is 100% a territory and a market that should be on the MotoGP calendar. We've seen enough stuff on social media to justify the passion and the enthusiasm that the fans and the people, the Indonesian people have. And I've seen more than several comments, Neil, you could back this up, of people saying their first visit to this particular part of the world was entirely pleasant. The people were fantastic, very welcoming. I just think on Sunday there was, okay, where are the fans? Where is this crazy fever for MotoGP that we've all been told about? What kind of issue there? Was it a ticket price thing? Was it an access to the island thing? Was it something to do with the infrastructure of the circuit that just wasn't ready to host such a vast volume of people? And then, of course, we get into the process of the track degradation. Moto3 running ahead, without any problems, but then suddenly Moto2 being cut by 9 laps from 25 to 16. We're getting mixed messages about whether the race distance has been cut also for MotoGP because of the state of the track or because it was a weather thing. It was, very confusing. It seemed kind of chaotic, and it just seemed to undermine the credibility of the event a little bit. Because, like David pointed out earlier, you had the president of the country in attendance. It was obviously a very big deal. So I just had the feeling that the rain came along, and to see the amount of grip that the riders ended up having in MotoGP. Because watching the safety car going around, it looked like Silverstone in 18. It was flooded. It was absolutely flooded. And sitting there waiting, I think there was more than a couple of us thinking, okay, there's no way this can happen. You cannot ride a motorcycle around there. But in the end, the guys were setting lap times only 8 seconds off their dry times, which is staggering. And to see some of the lean angles and some of the overtaking moves, some of the bravado of the riders in the actual MotoGP race was fantastic. And in the end, we had a spectacle. So, yeah, I think, everything from the rain shaman to the flashes of lightning that we saw, Neil, I think you informed us on the WhatsApp group that the organisation had actually pulled the marshals away from the circuit because of the threat of the thunderstorm and the lightning flashes. I think the rain just created an extra element of drama, but in the end kind of saved things.
Yeah, Zara, my friend who writes the MotoGP rules, she said, I see they found a new way of fixing the asphalt. Just throw a lightning bolt at it and that should be enough to melt it. It was... Yes, I think the rain did save it. It was a complete mess. All of those answers, all those questions you posed, Adam, could be answered with yes. It was saved because it rained, because they could ride. The race had already been cut from 27 to 20 laps because of the track surface, not because of the rain. The rain came later. The track is there. If you build it, they will come idea. You build the track, you generate the interest, and then you build the infrastructure to host all of that. But people, locals were saying that it was actually cheaper to go to, well, the ticket prices for F1 at Sepang were cheaper than the MotoGP prices at Mandalika, which means it's completely wrongly priced. And then an Australian pointed out to me, "Oh, Bali and Lombok, we love that. That's where we go on holiday." So it could also end up being sort of like a second or third Australian GP rather than an Indonesian GP, which again is really a shame. Really, what MotoGP needs is a race near Jakarta or near a major population centre.
Well, the other side of that coin as well is, though, what's the benefit on that for Indonesia? Like, the reason that it costs so much to build a track means that you have to get a benefit from that. They get their benefit from the Aussies coming up for a week-long holiday or 2 weeks. People coming over, just like people go over to Thailand for the Buriram round to do a week in Bangkok, and then they head down to the race. These racetracks and these events aren't put on the calendar so that Indonesians are able to enjoy their home round. They're there so that you're able to advertise just how attractive the country is. Come here, look at the beaches, look at the bikes, and then spend a load of money. The locals aren't going to spend that money, whereas foreign tourists will. And I think that's one of the things that is easily forgotten at this stage, where when you make that investment, it's to try and promote your country, your tourism. I think, Adam, one of the things about the racetrack that I found really interesting was just how grippy it was, like you said, because when they changed when they resurfaced the section of the track, that was one of the big question marks. Was it still going to be as grippy in the wet conditions? It's that grippy because it's brand new. It'll be interesting to see how grippy it's going to be in a year's time when MotoGP comes back to town, or when Superbikes goes there at the end of the season, because we saw for the Superbike race just how grippy it was, because pretty much from the second lap of the race, we saw riders, especially riders like Toprak, just endoing into corners and just having so much force through. You don't see that in wet conditions. We saw that this weekend as well in the MotoGP race. Will that be the case if in 6 months' time, 9 months' time, 12 months' time, whenever the track has been in these harsh conditions all the way through? But I thought, like you said, Adam, the rain did save the weekend, because we had the shorter race. We had lots of excitement all the way through. And David got to see the Shaman as well, so it was great.
Just to go back to the amount of grip was absolutely amazing, because I worked it out. The fastest lap of Fabio Quartararo during the race was 8.4% slower than a normal lap. And normally at a racetrack, a wet track, it'll be 12, 13, 14% of a normal fast lap. So it was excellent. And I remember watching Toprak doing stoppies and thinking, okay, this is not normal in the wet.
Yeah, I think it was John Mayer that said the amount of times he was using his elbows through the corners, he was just looking and thinking, whoa, what am I doing here? This is the wet. But he actually felt confident enough and felt there was enough grip to do that, which is quite something. Just to go back to what Adam initially said, I think there were real concerns, genuine concerns on Thursday, that there was going to be some severe issues. I think there was always going to be a race, but just maybe a race at half distance, or a very shortened race if conditions had been as hot as they were on Thursday right the way through the weekend. I think they can count their lucky blessings in many respects that Friday and Saturday was punctured by rainstorms at certain points. On Thursday, I heard multiple reports of people saying that when they went out for the track walk, parts of this track, both the old surface and the new surface between turn 17 and turn 5, was basically coming up. You could kick it a little forcefully and stones would come up and chunks of the track would come up itself. And then after the Moto2 race, I was down speaking to a couple of the guys from Moto2, and they were saying it is really dangerous at turn 17. Like, genuinely, if MotoGP went ahead in dry conditions after that, I don't even know if they could have done their 20 laps as it was shortened to. So yes, at one point it did look like the rain was maybe going to call off the whole thing. But in the end, I think the fact that it arrived saved everyone, because it could have got a bit crazy, especially at turn 17. So kind of a mad weekend with that being in the background, but I mean, just about got over the line. So I guess we can't be too critical.
Yeah, mad weekend, and as you can hear from Neil, still in the midst of it, getting himself through Jakarta airport to get himself home. We're going to take a break on the Paddock Pass podcast, and when we come back, we'll go through some more of the big talking points from the Indonesian Grand Prix. Welcome back to the Paddock Pass podcast, presented by Fly Racing in Renthal Street. David, let's kick off part 2 of today's pod with your big talking point from the weekend.
I think the big talking point ties in with what Adam was saying, and that was the rear Michelin. The fact that Michelin had to bring a different construction of tyre. It was a construction they first used in 2018, I think, in Thailand. It's basically stiffer and more stable because it was there to deal with the heat. They were expecting track temperatures to be consistently above 60 degrees. That was their experience at the test, because we had better weather at the test. It was pretty much, I mean, apart from the first day, it was pretty much dry and sunny every day. And they were getting very, very high track temperatures. And Michelin weren't certain that the tyres would let go. We've seen this, I think, let's see, Argentina 2016 or 17, I think maybe 2016, where I think it was Lawrence Baz's tyre let go or Scott Redding. Yeah, exactly. Scott Redding's tyre let go. What happens is you get too much heat into the tyres, and especially around these really fast tracks. Mandalika has that whole fast flowing section, and that puts a lot of heat into the tyres that was not cooling off. And they were already having problems with the right hand side of the tyre at some places where they were losing grip because the right hand side of the tyre was getting too hot. So Michelin bought this tyre for really, really hot track temperatures. That meant we didn't quite get the hot temperatures. That really turned out to be quite bad for a lot of riders. The Suzuki's, it didn't work. It didn't work for the Hondas. Pol Espargaro was absolutely livid, saying that, look, we set this bike up for the old tyre and it was working really well. He was fastest during the test, so obviously he was upset. Then they would bring this new one and it had less grip, and it was problems. Jack Miller liked it because it gave a bit more stability, and sometimes you want that stability, but it really punished some riders. It punished the Hondas, it punished the Suzuki's. The riders who couldn't get the heat into it, where the rear was sort of letting go, and it has to be at least a factor in Marc's crash, in Marc Marquez's crash, because he was really pushing, and we saw several times that the rear was coming round on him. It was very much sort of like the old 500 days, or the old 990s with no traction control, where you would just sort of use a throttle to bring it round. Obviously, Marc doesn't want electronics. He has all of his electronics dialed down as far as possible because he wants that control on his wrist. But this I mean, it was off throttle. He went in, closes the throttle. He's doing about 180, 190 kilometers an hour. And the rear just came round, gripped, snapped, and then threw him off. And I think that was, I think tyres were a big factor in that. The fact that they weren't providing the grip that they had. But I can't see that Michelin had much choice, because if it had been hot and they bought the original tyres, I think you would have seen tyres falling apart, and that would have been, you would have had a different complaints. I think it's just par for the course.
Yeah, I thought for me it was those off-throttle moments were just so surprising to see. We just don't see it all that often anymore. I thought as well, David, like when we had Marc crashing in the qualifying session as well in Q1, and jumps himself straight back up, runs back to the pits, goes out, has another crash as well within 5 minutes. It was, again, another one of those things that we just don't see all that often. But Neil, what was the main thoughts from the riders that you talked about this? Because obviously we were able to jump in on the Zoom calls, but it's very different whenever you're able to catch them walking through the paddock.
Yeah, it was strange. Like as Dave mentioned, they're really penalised some of the manufacturers. Others, it didn't penalise them so much. You know, Yamaha seemed to be fine, really. And it's strange because, you know, this rear tyre obviously has, you know, less grip. It's hard. And the Yamahas, you know, they depend on there being a lot of grip out there, yet it seemed to really not affect them less. I think Franco Morbidelli said on Friday that they were probably the least penalised out of all the manufacturers on the grid. It wasn't because they had any advantage or anything, it was just that their level from the test to the race was maybe down just one notch, whereas the Hondas were down 4 or 5 notches, the same with the Suzukis. So yeah, it really depended from manufacturer. You know, Paul Espargaro was probably the most outspoken of the lot, just saying that it's not really professional or befitting a series like MotoGP that Michelin come and bring a 4-year-old tyre whenever, you know, all the bikes now on the grid are designed around the rear tyre that Michelin introduced for 2020. And we saw initially that really benefited the inline fours, the Yamahas and the Suzukis in 2020, and since then, KTM, Honda, they've had to, and Ducati essentially, they've really had to change their bikes. In Honda's case, completely revolutionize their machine in order to take advantage of the extra grip that this rear tire profile offers. And then to go back to 2018, I mean, it's clear to see why some of them were thrown so far off, or so far out of the operating window. So yeah, that was interesting. Another thing, you know, maybe I could have said this during Adam's talking point, but I think the rain also saved a lot of kind of red faces from Michelin Sunday, because a lot of riders were saying that had it been hot conditions for the race, the front tire temperatures were so critical and so high, especially at this track where if you went off the racing line, it was quite dodgy and it was very dirty. Therefore, it was basically going to be everyone in line all race long. And if you're behind a bike, the front tire temperature was just going to escalate at a kind of alarming rate. So it was crazy. I had riders on Saturday, like Dranmere, like Paul Espargaro, saying, we're not going to finish the race, like unless something drastically different happens with our setup and warm-up. In this current state, we're going to be crashing out because we can't control the front tire temperature at all. So, you know, part of me would have loved to have seen just how it would have panned out, because it was going to be one of those crazy odd races that comes up every now and again, where the conditions in the tires are basically the main factor, you know, rather than who's the quickest on that for the day. But we didn't get to see that. But yeah, I think, you know, the rain coming was another reason why Michelin were probably breathing a sigh of relief come Sunday night, because suddenly riders were talking about how grippy these Michelin tires are, rather than how rubbish their decision to bring this 2018 tire was.
Yeah, I mean, the Hondas are an interesting case point, weren't they, Neil? Because, I mean, you know, Paul's interview or his debrief on Sunday, you know, he didn't, like David mentioned, he didn't hold anything back really in terms of criticism and saying they're an external partner. They have their responsibility and their part to play. But it felt like when Marc spoke to the press, especially on Saturday, about his approach for the race on Sunday and how he was going to throw a soft rear in and just attack and go for it. I mean, it seemed to highlight the best and worst of Marc Marquez. And in the end, the worst, which was multiple crashes over the weekend, one of them being so big they counted him out of the race, was the one that came to the fore. The way that Michelin, I mean, Paul's comments were something. I mean, he was saying it was a waste of time and money to embark on a 3-day test and then to come back and have the frame of reference for their grip completely thrown out the window. And he had a point. I don't think this was just a case of Honda throwing their toys out the pram.
No, he didn't. He didn't have a point. The point is that the Mandalika test was not for the manufacturers. The Mandalika test was for Michelin and for for MotoGP, for the series. The reason that they do that, the reason you have a test at a track before you go there, is so that the riders understand, so that the teams, the tire manufacturers, everyone else understands what was there, so that you can bring the correct tires. Whether Michelin brought the right tires or not, that's a separate discussion. But it was also for the factories and all the rest of it. Paul was just pissed off because he was fastest at the test. He had the bike set up, and then he couldn't come through to it. But that isn't. I mean, really, that test shouldn't have happened. If it had been a normal season, that test wouldn't have happened. We would have had 3 days at Sepang and then gone to Qatar and started the season.
Yeah, Dave, I mean, you're right, but Paul wasn't the only one who was pissed off about the tyre situation. He was just the most expressive. And of course, Michelin need a frame of reference for Lombok, but then, it's also 3 days of only 5 in a pre-season test. So it can't just be orientated for the tyres. If not, then when are we going to Kimi Ring and, getting ready for potentially low temperatures or more humid temperatures there?
We've already had a test at Kimmering. There was a test at Kimmering in 2019,
3 years ago. Yeah. So, I just think, the way that the Michelins and the level of grip affected everybody. I mean, I love Franco Morbidelli's quote on Friday, I think it was, when he said, the Yamaha in crappy conditions, we are the less kind of crappy. I mean, that's a real smart definition of their current situation, I think. But like Neil pointed out, again, bring the rain into it, and it saved a lot of faces, I think. I do wonder whether we'll see. I mean, Mark also as well pointed out that he'd won on this tire, so it's not a complete bastard of the catalogue, if you like.
Neil, what about you? What was your big talking point from the weekend?
Well, kind of following on from what we just mentioned there, I think Marc's crash is something maybe that's worth discussing. And we mentioned it obviously in the moments of the weekend section of the podcast, but I think it's just interesting that Marc's approach through the weekend was cavalier. It was quite a strange situation on Saturday evening where we had a debrief with Marc at the track, and he was talking for about 12 minutes. I mean, usually you get 3 or 4 minutes with Marc, but it seemed that Honda and both him were happy to kind of talk at length about what was going on and what his problems were. He crashed 4 times over the weekend, after he had crashed for the second and third time in Q1 and missed out on the spot in Q2. He was talking about how he was going to attack the race. I think his initial quote was, it's going to be a crazy race, so we just need to kind of be careful and get some points on the board, before he then switched to saying, I'm going to put the softest option rear tyre in and attack from the start and just go like hell. And he was going like hell on Sunday. But I just think it's interesting now, obviously after his issues with his vision and with diplopia at the end of last year, which really put his career on the thread. Again, like it did in 2011. He's gone and he's taken an almighty smash again here to his head, suffered another concussion. And I just think that Marc can't keep doing this, because I'm sure the smash that he had to his head when he was training on an enduro bike at the end of October last year was not as significant or as heavy as the one he just suffered on Sunday, yet it kept him out of action, kept him on the sofa for the best part of 3 months. Anytime he stood up for a prolonged period, he was feeling dizzy. So you wonder what kind of effect this is going to have on him this week coming after the race in Indonesia when he gets home. I mean, and surely that must be a massive concern and a massive worry for him whenever all is said and done and he's been diagnosed with concussion. I just wonder whether he can afford to have another weekend like that. If he does come back in Argentina and he's okay and he's past fit to ride, surely he cannot have a kind of cavalier approach like that again, where it's just all in, I have to put all my cards on the table and try the best that I can, even if it might result in a crash, because he's taken enough bangs and bites in the last couple of years to show that he's pushed the envelope enough through his career, and it's bit him a couple of times really, really heavily. And his body can only take so many of these beatings.
Yeah, I went through and watched it sort of frame by frame to try to understand exactly what happened. And like Adam said, I thought it was really interesting seeing the technology save it, because you saw the airbag inflate, and the airbag now, which the Alpinestars airbag, which Marc is using, covers the hips, the lower back, covers a lot of the body. It's giving a lot of protection, and he came down, and that absorbed. He fell on his right shoulder, which was obviously the shoulder which has been giving him so many problems. That absorbed a lot of the energy. When he did bang his head, it's sort of like he hit the chin plate first. So he was lucky also because it was a little bit more glancing than it might otherwise have been. He did go up a long way, at least 2 or 3 meters, and then sort of came down hard, but he came down sort of moving along, and he sort of quickly transitioned into rolling. So I also wonder if that tumbling motion was part of the cause of the dizziness he had. I think there is clearly, some kind of, basically brain trauma, some kind of concussion. I think it's very, very good that they stopped him from riding. The question of whether he can keep doing it, that's the way that Marc rides. I think he keeps on going until he can't ride anymore. I think he's going to be Mick Doohan and not Valentino Rossi. He will stop when he can't ride anymore.
Yeah, I think, like you say, Dave, what is next for Marquez? Where does he go from here? What kind of condition is he in? He's got to get ready for 2 more trips across the world to Argentina and the USA. He's 12th in the standings. I just, can he continue this MO of like crashing multiple times on a weekend? I mean, we said it, the first time when he came back from his broken arm. I think people said it as well when he came back originally from his shoulder injury. It doesn't seem to stop him, of course, but you do think at some point someone's going to say, especially maybe a Honda, listen, we've designed a new concept of motorcycle. We need you in the game.
I do think that a lot of the problems, the tire was a contributory factor to this because of the way that the tire was reacting. Marc was pushing too hard, but the way that this tire reacted was also a contributory factor, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those situations as well, like you talk about that brand new Honda, that's also been designed and developed to make it a more open bike for every other rider as well. Maybe for Marc as well, this is one of those instances where he sees that it's not quite as targeted for him, and maybe it's going to take him that bit of time to get used to it. Neil?
Yeah, just a quick thing to add, Steve. I had heard from some people within Honda just saying that Marc obviously isn't taking the fact that the Honda has not been built around his specific needs so well. And I mean, that's natural. I mean, he kind of knows he's up against it. And the fact that someone is on the same motorcycle as him, and as he admitted in Qatar, is riding it better than him, basically understands how this particular bike needs to be ridden. We can see Marc over the weekend, the rear grip wasn't there. He doesn't have the feeling with the front like he normally does with the Honda. And when he tried to push that front, it just washed away twice within 6 minutes in qualifying. And that is another thing that he's having to come back from. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see, as Adam says, where he goes from here.
I think for me, my big talking point from the weekend is going to be Miguel Oliveira's win, because we've barely mentioned him all the way through the pod so far. And it was a really impressive performance from the Portuguese rider. He said that the foundation of it was just those first couple of laps, and he really was committed to what he could do in those first few laps. Adam, you spoke to Miguel after the win. What was his thoughts?
What do you mean, before he dashed away to get his flight and had to duck out of the press conference, you mean? No. I mean, Dave and I chatted about this on the Note Show, and why do riders book flights so early? I mean, do they not entertain the possibility they can actually win a race? But yeah, I mean, Steve, Miguel Oliveira's win might have surprised a few people, but he had the pace. I mean, he was looking comfortable from Friday, and getting onto the track for the first time. I think when it rained, it really just opened the track for him. And then obviously, from hearing the comments of riders like Paul Espargaro, when they're moving offline, they're either hitting sort of white curbs which they couldn't see because of the spray or because of the mud or the dust. Having to deal with a lot of roost. Oliveira didn't have that problem. We saw a couple of entertaining laps with Jack Miller, and then he burst three. So for his fourth win, in MotoGP. So it was an accomplished ride in like we say, in pretty atrocious conditions. Somebody like Jorge Martin, who we might get to a bit later, was a real victim of one of those channels of water that we saw running across the track, sort of, LaSalle International Circuit style. But no, it was a big win for KTM, and I guess we'll talk about them a bit.
Yeah, it was an outstanding ride for Oliveira, and really well done by KTM. Again, I think the rain played a little bit of a role here, because Oliveira's start was just absolutely fantastic. He was starting on the left-hand side of the track, which was really the dirty side of the track, despite them having done this practice start. But the fact that, when it rains, it doesn't make any difference. The whole track is slippery, so it doesn't make any difference if you're in the middle, on the right, on the left. It's all the same. He got a fantastic start. He said he followed Miller about a bit before to sort of understand what was going on. Once he understood what was going on, he knew where he could push and where he couldn't, and then he just took off. And the way he managed that race was just exceptional, just really, really class ride.
As we're in the midst of the MSMA debating ride height devices and whether they'll be banned going forward, it was kind of curious to see Brad Binder become a bit of a victim of a malfunction of a ride height device. He said, the South African commented that if it hadn't rained, he probably doubted he would have got to the end of the race, because he was dealing with a vastly lowered motorcycle. I mean, that shows you the perils of this tech, and how it can go wrong. I mean, as it is, he managed to come through from 8th place. But your comment there, Dave, about the start is key as well, because for the second Grand Prix in a row, we've seen a KTM RC16 that has managed to, effectively whole shot in terms of the impetus they have on the first lap.
I think there's a couple of things just I'd like to mention here. The fact that Oliveira, crashed out of the race in Qatar, but if you look at his FP4 pace that weekend, he was as strong, I think, in pace as Binder. He just had a terrible qualifying and was trying to do too much in the race. Couldn't quite understand why he lost the front. So I think the potential was there from race one. The second thing was just these guys have had barely any wet weather running on their 2022 bikes. And for them to basically have a sighting lap, warm-up lap, and then jump into the race, it's just quite phenomenal to be doing the kind of things that they were doing, getting right down to the fast pace out front. So, chapeau, especially for the guys up front. You look at someone like Frederic Quartararo, he was quick, then dropped back a little bit and then found his rhythm. But for Oliveira to be doing that rhythm basically from the start was just wildly impressive. And also I feel it's significant that, yes, it's only round two, and yes, we've had two very strange rounds, two almost anomalies, but I think it's significant that KTM are leading the Constructors' Championship for the first time in history, also the Teams Championship for the first time in their history as well. And I just think it underlines what a solid, impressive job they have done over the pre-season when it initially wasn't looking so good. I don't know about Oliveira and Binder fighting for the championship, but I think they're going to be regular players up front this year. I think they're going to be regular podium finishers. And it does seem that they've finally got that balance between testing lots of new things and refining their package. They seem to have got that right finally. And yeah, it looks like they've got, in terms of personnel at their disposal and the riders, they've got a fantastic operation.
Well, first of all, there's 19 races left, which is the same length as the 2018 and 2019 MotoGP series. So, it's a bit early to be saying 475 points. And the other thing is about the ride height devices. I'm not sure, I need to check this, but it seems like what they're going to ban is the front ride height device, not the rear ride height device. At the moment, it looks like the ride height device, the rear ones might still be legal. But again, I need to check this.
Yeah, that's going to be one of the big talking points over the course of the next couple of rounds as well, Dave, to see exactly what happens for that. We're going to take another break on the Paddock Pass podcast, and when we come back, we're going to look at our winners and losers from the Indonesian Grand Prix. Welcome back to the Paddock Pass podcast presented by Fly Racing in Renthal Street. We're going to, before we move into winners and losers, we're going to give Adam the chance just to have a little bit of a gloat. Adam, we've obviously got the Fantasy League this year, and you just managed to stay up at the top of it again.
I have one word to say, Steve. P1. That's all. No, arrogance and cockiness aside. It's actually an abbreviation, isn't it? Arrogance and cockiness aside, it's really cool to see. I think there's over 200 people now joining the Fantasy League. As Dave pointed out, it's a long old championship. So, if anybody still wants to join in, we're talking with some people about getting some prizes at the end of the season. So it's Paddock Pass Pod Knowles, I think is the title of the Fantasy League. Just come and search for us. We're easy to find. We're very welcoming. We don't like to boast or brag about any of our achievements or predictions.
Well, 3/4 of us don't.
Oh, no, that's right. But then, the moment of choosing Miguel Oliveira into my team on Saturday was pure inspiration. So I'm happy to keep it P1. Can I just point out as well that my wife is also in the top 5? So, I think working for Dorna and having a little bit of insight there is obviously paying off. I want to know what you three are doing.
It's rigged. It's rigged.
I'll be honest, I'm making progress, Ad, so I'm happy enough. It's a long season. I was only outscored by you by, I don't know, I think it was 25 points last weekend. So I'm looking at it from the perspective of Marc Marquez. I only gave up 25 points this week. I can still win this. It's a long season.
Yeah, it was a bad week to have Marc Marquez in your MotoGP. Marc Marquez and Honda in your fantasy team. I need to get the hang of this swapping malarkey.
I don't know, Dave. We managed to get a full point out of Mark for his qualifying efforts. So that was really positive. I was happy with that. It's really good to have him as one of my gold riders as well.
Just a question: has there ever been someone coming back from 75th in the standings to win a championship before? Asking for a friend.
Well, I'll tell you what, Neil, just to give you an opportunity to make up for such a disaster at the start of your fantasy league, we'll give you the chance to pick your first winner of the weekend.
My first winner of the weekend was also Thailand's first winner in Grand Prix history. Somket Chantra won the Moto2 race in pretty amazing style. I just thought it was fantastic. How he rode. A couple of the Moto2 lads that finished behind him just said, chapeau, that was his day. None of us, even if the conditions were just right, were catching Chandra on Sunday. And he's a guy that's been a bit crash happy before, a bit excitable. I think there was maybe a few cynics, myself included, that were thinking, this is poised for Chandra to maybe throw this away as he gets overexcited towards the end. But he set the fastest lap, I think, on lap 12 and just cruised home. I mean, it was such an accomplished ride. And let's be frank, I think we've had maybe 2 or 3 occasions before where we've seen Chandra do something like that. He started pre-season really well. I think he was fastest at one of the pre-season tests at the ref. Then he had a big crash, I think, at Portimao. That knocked his confidence, and I thought, okay, well, let's just put him back. But I mean, we're looking at a guy that's made a humongous step. I don't think any of us would ever have thought Somket Chandra was capable of posting a result like that in Moto2. So fantastic. And also extra points for his Park Fermi interview with Simon Crayford afterwards, because I think that was my highlight of the day. Just so excitable, such a nice guy. What a moment. I think that's added already an extra 20 to 30,000 on the gate at Berlin.
Yeah, 2 things just quickly, like Neil says. I mean, the Park Fermi interview is absolute gold. I mean, find a way to watch it. I mean, he's almost like an evangelical priest. I mean, I'm a believer. I mean, also to see that kind of expression of joy is something you rarely see. I mean, especially last year in Moto2, where we had the same team taking 1-2 on the podium for 7 races. Just to get someone fresh in there, somebody achieving a milestone was really cool to see. But Neil, I mean, was there any kind of justification for the way that Chandra managed to make that victory happen? I mean, was it a case of changing grip, like you say, there were spots of rain in Moto2, or was it the fact that he just nailed the shorter distance by sprinting ahead early on and keeping that gap?
There were signs in qualifying. He qualified well. In warm-up, he was running the harder option rear tire, which wasn't the race option. And even with the harder rear tire, he was super fast. He was doing the same speed as the leader. So he just had the setup right. I think he's obviously made a massive step over the winter. Seems to be riding with really good confidence. And you look at the conditions. I guess the conditions we had, humidity, heat, similar conditions to what he would have been used to riding in Thailand, as he was coming up. So I think some of those factors could have been at play, but even still, for him to do that was really unexpected.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in with my winners from the weekend because it kind of follows on as well, Neil. And it's those underrepresented regions that we've had in GP over the years, because obviously Thailand's first winner with Chantra, we also had Mario Aggi on the front row in Moto3, but you had Diogo Moreira up there as well. So you had a guy in his second race coming from Brazil, came up through the ranks in the Spanish Championships. So I have to say, I thought it was really positive to see that road to MotoGP really paying off for a lot of these guys. Chantra and Aggi came through from the Asian Talent Cup, and then obviously the European Talent Cup for Moreira racing in Spain. So I think that was really positive. But David, what about you? Who was your big winner from the weekend?
I think my big winner for the weekend is Fabio Quartararo, who, again, we haven't mentioned. He had a fantastic race, qualified on pole, was looking really, really strong. We had, looking at his FP4 pace, he was so much faster than the rest. I think he would have had at least as good a race as that if it had been in the dry. Took him a little while to figure out how much grip there was, but when he was, he had a really, really strong pace. Looked to be catching Miguel Oliveira, but Oliveira just responded and managed even better. So, and he comes out of it. After Qatar, it was all, my season's a disaster and I don't know what I'm going to do. But he found feeling with the bike. That was, for him, I think, the most important thing. He was feeling comfortable with the bike again. And if they can carry this on for the rest of the season, then that's good. He made a big step forward. Like I said, I've just sort of I'm sort of undoing what I just said about the season still being a long way to go and it all not meaning very much. But I think that Fabio Quartararo is now best placed for the championship. One more thing about Neil's point. I think, if I'm not correct, that if I'm not wrong, that the Triumph actually built their 765s in Thailand, so it was two Thais on the podium.
Yeah, they do actually, because I remember having to go to the factory a couple of years ago whenever they were just taking on that Moto2 contract.
It was three Thais on the podium because Aaron Canet was wearing his bow tie. So there you go.
Oh, Neil, don't give up the day job.
What about you, Adam? Do you have any really bad jokes like Neil to tie up your winner of the weekend?
He's completely thrown me, actually, Steve. I don't really know what to say now. But my winner of the weekend is KTM, for obvious reasons. Like Neil mentioned earlier, for the first time, top of the constructors' standings. First time as topping the team standings. Both riders in the top four of the World Championship standings, even though we are only two races in. And, again, while Neil has undoubtedly killed Andrea Migno's bid for World Championship success on the Moto3 broadcast, I think his point about Brad Binder and Oliveira for World Championship contention is actually pretty valid. I mean, I would put like a sneaky, bit of money on Brad Binder being like the dark horse in the championship this year, because from evidence so far, he seems to be a little bit more of a live wire when it comes to the Saturday qualification lark, which held him back so much in 2021. So if Binder in the next 3, 4, 5 races is a consistently good qualification performer, then I think he's going to get the results that's going to keep him in the top 5 of the championship. And he might just have that ability to bounce quite well, which he does, and then, endure as the season goes on.
Yeah, not bad for KTM in Moto3 as well. They had 8 bikes inside the top 9, but just not that race winner. But it was good to see the CF Moto brand getting their first podium as well with Carlos Tata. A good weekend for him. I'm going to kick off the losers of the weekend just because Adam's already mentioned him, Andrea Migno. And obviously, no fault of his own that he has that crash, but Migno was a little bit further down the order than we would have expected from him. Obviously, I think was 8th and 9th position himself in Sasaki at the time of the crash. So Migno, I think for me, he was my big loser from the weekend. Neil, what about you? Who was yours?
Pecco Bagnaia, one of the preseason favourites, if not the preseason favourite, with 2 races into the year, and he scored 1 point. Obviously, things have just not really gone well for him. He did all he could, not to specifically say that Michelin had kind of scuppered his chances in this race, but said that basically there was just no grip there throughout in the wet, and he couldn't really understand why. Yeah, kind of an anonymous showing. Very lucky actually to finish the race and not crash, because he had a huge moment going into turn one. And yeah, Pecco's like a really nice, just a good kind of polite guy. But there's just been a few examples in his debriefs of him getting a wee bit agitated, and you can tell that the strain is maybe just affecting him ever so slightly. He's not quite the calm, measured presence that he is. He's snapped a few times I've seen, not least at Mr. David Emmett after the race in Qatar, because he was crying about the engine saga that has befallen Ducati this year. So yeah, I think obviously still so much running to go, but it has been a bad start for Bagnaia. And already, he's 30 points behind the championship leader. I mean, okay, we're not talking about a huge insurmountable amount, but it's certainly not the start he would have envisioned.
David, obviously, other than annoying Pecco, you're only a point behind him in the championship standings as well.
I am, yes. It's 475 points to go, so everything is still open. My big loser is it has to be Marc Marquez, because crashes like this, I mean, it has to knock his confidence. The two crashes in Q1, I mean, yeah, they were sort of unfortunate, but that massive off that high side, he's had so many big crashes recently, so much sort of he's had to go through so much emotionally that it's got to start taking its toll at some point. Just the stress, the strain of it all, having to, because what's remarkable about him is the way that he's able to sort of just bluff his way through to convince himself that that he can get through this and come back. And that sort of mental sort of force of will is really exceptional. But at a certain point, that sort of chutzpah has got to run out.
Adam, what about you? Who's your big loser from the Indonesian Grand Prix?
I'm going to go for the Martinator, Steve, purely because 2 races in is on 0 points, and having only recently finished, watching the Amazon MotoGP Unlimited series. I mean, Jorge Martin is one of the more prevalent characters in there. And it's quite revealing, I think, his dealings with Fonzie Nieto as part of the Pramac team. There's moments in the series where he's dealing with anxiety, fear, and he's actually comes across as more as one of the relatable characters. At the same time, so I guess he's more kind of in my consciousness, but at the same time, I think he was kind of Ducati's golden child, wasn't he? Amongst all the riders they have in their stock, you think, is Martin going to be the one that's really going to push somebody like Jack Miller for the factory seat? Of course, Enea Bastianini surprised us all a little bit in Qatar, but Martin 2 races right at the bottom of the riders' standings was 0. I mean, that's worse than Pecco, obviously. So it's it's a pretty poor start to the year in terms of elevating his status even further in MotoGP.
Can I just ask you a question, Adam? Has there been a time in the past couple of years when Jorge Martin hasn't been floating around your consciousness?
In a positive way, Neil, not so much. I did feel like there was a crumb of sympathy for him in Red Bull Ring, where he just veered into the red track limits area and lost that Grand Prix win in Moto 2, 2019 perhaps. I can't even remember the year now. 2020. There you go. So he had some sympathy there, but until he changes his nickname, then I'm not a fan.
I think you're going to be waiting a wee while for that, Adam. Obviously enough, though, no one's going to be waiting a long time for more content from the Paddock Pass podcast. We're going to be out every week as usual through the course of this season. We also have on patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast lots of additional content all the way through the season. So check that out. We've got lots of different tiers that give different options on it. The newest tier we have is actually a $50 tier where you're able to jump on a Zoom call with us, get some merchandise as well, and plenty of other offers through the course this season. Paddock Notes, like Adam mentioned, is on our $10 tier. So over the course of a Grand Prix weekend, that's where we'll be able to check in after we've talked to all the riders, talked to the teams, and get everyone up to speed over the course of the weekend. So until next week on the Paddock Pass podcast, a big thank you from all of us for everyone listening to this week's show, and a big thank you to Renthal and to Fly Racing for supporting the podcast.